Someone left your life, maybe recently, maybe a while ago, maybe in a way that was clean or in a way that left marks. And the grief is real. You do not need to be told to feel it less. But underneath the grief, if you sit with it long enough and honestly enough, there is something else. Something you may not have said out loud because it did not feel acceptable. A quiet, guilty sense that the leaving was right. If you recognize something in those last 3 words, hit like. This video was built specifically for what you are carrying. Here is what nobody tells you about the people who leave during a genuine transformation. Their leaving is not separate from your growth. It is a function of it, not caused by failure or abandonment or the unlucky deterioration of something that could have lasted, caused by the same physics that govern every other structural change when the structure of a life reorganizes itself. Not every element of the previous structure belongs in the new configuration. Think of a building undergoing renovation. Every building has 2 types of walls. Load-bearing walls, which hold the weight of the structure above them, remove them, and the building collapses. And partition walls, which divide space and define rooms but carry no structural load. Remove a partition wall and the building stands. The space changes. What was 2 separate rooms becomes 1. What felt like necessary division reveals itself as optional arrangement. Most of the relationships that define a period of your life are partition walls. They create the particular shape of that period, the rooms of your social life, the divisions between different versions of yourself in different contexts, the sense of where things are and how they are organized. They feel necessary because the life has been built around them for so long that you have forgotten the structure would hold without them. But when the renovation begins, when the configuration of the life changes at the load-bearing level, some partition walls come down. Not because they were weak, because the new layout does not require the same divisions. The people who leave are not load-bearing walls, not the ones that leave during a genuine transformation. The load-bearing relationships, the ones that hold the weight of who you actually are at your deepest and most real, those do not leave when you grow. They adjust. They flex. They sometimes become confused or uncertain about who you are becoming. But they remain because they were never built on the particular shape of the room. They were built on the structure itself. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The leaving is a situation that cannot be changed. Not really. Not without cost that would require you to stop the renovation entirely and return to the old configuration. The challenge is not to prevent the leaving. The challenge is to find the meaning in it. To understand that the partition coming down is not a loss of what was essential. It is the revelation of what the space was always capable of holding once the unnecessary divisions were removed. The people who left were not taken from you. The renovation removed the walls that their presence was built into, and the space that remains is larger than it was before the walls came down. And this is what the leaving was always about. There are specific ways the leaving shows up in the aftermath, the precise daily experiences that tell you both the grief and the relief are real, and that neither of them is wrong. If you recognize any of these, they are not signs of ingratitude or betrayal. They are accurate readings of a complicated truth. The first is finding yourself explaining the leaving to other people in a way that defends the person who left. They ask what happened, and before you have fully processed your own response, you are presenting their perspective, the reasons the leaving made sense from where they were standing, the ways in which the departure was understandable, the case for their choices that you have been quietly building and presenting on their behalf. This is not generosity, though it looks like it. It is the grief trying to make the leaving coherent, to find a framework in which the departure is justified and therefore in some way earned, which would make it less random and therefore less terrible. But the defense is also telling you something. Part of you already understands why it was supposed to happen. The defense is not protecting it. It is protecting the meaning of the leaving. The second is noticing that the space their absence created is not empty, differently quiet, not worse, not better, but organized differently with a quality of air in it that was not present before, and not knowing what to do with the relief that flickers in that quiet, because the relief feels like a confession. It feels like evidence that you didn't value them the way you thought you did. It feels like a betrayal of the grief that is also genuinely present. But both are true. The grief and the relief are not contradictions. They are the honest response of a system to a change that was both genuinely painful and structurally correct. The relief does not cancel the grief, it accompanies it, and together they are more honest than either one alone. The third is replaying the last interactions, looking for the moment you could have intervened. The specific exchange where a different response from you would have held the wall in place. You run these scenarios. What if you had said this? What if you had done that? What if the conversation had gone differently? Not because you genuinely believe you could have prevented the leaving, but because the alternative to preventing it is accepting that it was supposed to happen, and acceptance requires relinquishing the idea that you had control. The replay is the grief trying to preserve the illusion of control over something that was always going to move the way it moved. The fourth is grief arriving in waves that are followed, not by more grief but by a strange clarity. The wave crests, the feeling is full and real and present, and then it recedes, and what follows it is not relief exactly, but a quality of seeing that wasn't available before, as if the wave temporarily cleared something. And in the clearing you can perceive the shape of your life more accurately than the constant low-level noise of that relationship had been allowing. Not every wave, sometimes, but consistently enough that you have noticed it. The clarity is not compensation for the grief. It is the renovation revealing what the space was always capable of. But here's what no one tells you about what comes next. There is something you have not been able to say, not because it is untrue, but because there is no socially acceptable form for it. You have said the grief part, you have named the loss, allowed the sadness, done the work of honoring what the relationship was before it ended. But the other part, the part that exists alongside the grief, in the same moment, not after it. That part you have mostly kept to yourself because it does not fit the script for how loss is supposed to work. The other part is this. Something about the leaving was a relief. Not the leaving of the person, the releasing of the configuration. The particular dynamic, the specific weight of that relationship in its final form. The version of yourself you had to be to sustain it. Some part of you had been carrying that weight for longer than the grief is covering, and when the wall came down, something in you exhaled. Not because you wanted them gone, because the you that was being asked to remain in that configuration was a version of yourself that fit less and less, and the leaving released both of you from having to pretend otherwise. Viktor Frankl survived the loss of nearly everyone he loved, his wife, his parents, his brother, in conditions designed to eliminate the possibility of meaning. And what he found in the rubble of those losses was that meaning could not be assigned from outside. It had to be found from within, not in the idea that the losses were good, not in the fiction that they didn't hurt, in the specific, honest, personal question. What does this loss ask of me? What does it free me to become that the presence would have made hard? Here is something to do right now. Think of one quality, one way of being, one thing you were, one version of yourself that the relationship required you to maintain and that no longer fits who you are becoming. Just name it, not to them, to yourself. That quality is the partition wall that came down with the leaving, and the space where it stood is yours now. The grief is real. The relief is also real. Both belong. Neither cancels the other, and together they point toward the same truth. This was the right configuration for what your life needs to become next. This is when everything begins to shift. You came into this video still holding the weight of it, not because you haven't processed, because some weight doesn't lift on a timeline, because the grief of losing people, even the ones who were supposed to go, has a mass that moves through you at its own pace and cannot be hurried past by understanding alone. The understanding is here. The weight is also still here. Both are true and both are allowed. But here is what you can add to the weight. The meaning of what it points toward. Not to make it lighter, to make it purposeful. The people who left were the partition walls of a configuration that no longer serves the person you are in the process of becoming. Their leaving was not punishment, not evidence of your unworthiness or your failure to hold what mattered. It was the renovation announcing itself. The new configuration requiring different divisions, different room shapes, different allocations of the space that your life has to offer. What the leaving reveals is not the loss. It is the space. The actual dimensions of a life that was being partially organized around walls that were never load-bearing. And the space, once you let yourself look at it without immediately trying to fill it with grief or replacement, has a quality that the previous configuration never offered. It is quieter. It is more specifically shaped around what you actually are, rather than around what that particular dynamic required you to be. It is underneath the grief, closer to the truth of your life than what came before. Frankl's question applies here with full force. What does this loss ask of me? Not what did I lose? That accounting is already complete and fully known. What does this space ask me to become? What is possible in the configuration that exists now that was not possible in the one before? These questions are not betrayals of the grief. They are the grief maturing into meaning. The process by which something that happened to you becomes something that pointed you somewhere. The people who left were supposed to, not because their value was insufficient, because the configuration they were part of had served its purpose. And the renovation continues. The load-bearing walls remain. The structure holds, and the rooms are opening into each other in ways that the partition walls were preventing. If this found you in the middle of a leaving you are still making sense of, write in the comments. The space is mine now. Let's see how many of us are standing in the open room right now. If Nukivas is new to you, subscribe. Every video here is made for the person in the middle of a renovation they didn't choose. The next one continues from exactly where the open space leads. Don't fill the room back in before you see what it can hold.